Well, it's time for another exciting chapter in the Two Guys Against AI. I can't tell you I'm so excited as I do this. It's difficult for me to contain myself.
Well, what we're going to talk about today is the fact that we have AI and we're used to it. And I think most of us were introduced to it through chatgpt or some kind of deviation or variation of chatgpt, whether it was something to be your personal assistant, your tax advisor, your romantic partner, whatever it was, it all came from chatgpt, which is what was known as a large language model. So they fed tons of language into it, created algorithms, and I'm simplifying here, but basically it is a model that predicts what the next word is or the next thing. So in a graphic art, what would be the next line of drawing that would be there? So it's predicting in this way. And to all intent and purposes, seems pretty amazing in what it's able to do.
Like its cognitive ability, so to speak.
But it should be just predicting what the next word would be expected is. So that's why you see sometimes some mistypes, some words that aren't correct, because the model can't be 100% correct.
It's getting damn good though, Will, let me tell you.
Well, it is a tremendous model in and of itself, that's for sure. So what we're looking at then is we're looking at this model predicting what the next things are, and we've seen corporations, Meta, Google, OpenAI, all dump a ton of money in this. Well, the person in charge of AI at Meta was a guy by the name of Yann, a French person who had come over. He was hired there. He's been kind of, depending on who you read on the internet, either demoted or kind of pushed aside, because what he said is this large language model is a flawed model. It can never really reach that level of cognition. It can only be a predictive model. What he then says is what we should have is more like a world vision model. So, or a world AI. So here's the idea. When you come into existence as a human being, you come into a natural state of disorientation. We are the only species on this planet really that does this. You think of animals, your dog, your cat, they're kind of born, they have an instinct that takes over. We don't have an instinct. We cannot survive as infants. We don't know what we have to learn the world around us. That's why we have parents, family structures, etc. His notion is AI should learn exactly the same way from inception. So it should be almost like a vision model, seeing the world, perceiving the world, and it'll be a much more robust form of artificial intelligence.
Building upon itself.
Right.
Yeah.
What we've talked about that kind of leads into this as we talk about why he's been kind of sidelined is we've talked about the corporate aspects of this have really taken off. So it's really become about making money. So nobody's going to wait for this other model when they have this money-making model in front of them, right, which I think in a lot of ways we've said is a pretty dangerous model. And so what we're going to talk about is a little bit about what are these two models. I don't know necessarily that I would find this world model much better than the large language model, because again, we are replacing a lot of humanity with machines. But let's talk about this. One of the founding fathers, Yann LeCunn again, believes today's large language models are ultimately a dead end. What does that say about the stability and safety of the systems the tech giants are trying to deploy? So we've even seen like states can't, all of a sudden states' rights aren't there anymore because of federal coming in and saying you're not allowed to regulate this technology. It's for the federal government to regulate. And in a lot of ways, it seems pretty much not regulated at all to me, but that's where we are. So what do you
think? I don't even know that it can be regulated. I mean, that I think that's the other part of it is that, if you take a look at the possibilities that where there's filtering, for instance, the entity that is being filtered is obviously in a different place.
Yeah.
So that being said, here you've got a parameter that's been established as a quote filter, but the entity is acting outside of that filter and then having to be filtered after the fact. So what's actually going on in that head behind the curtain really starts to get very, very interesting. And I kind of like look at the large language model, and maybe this is crazy, and of course I'm crazy. I'm here, but I kind of think a large language model is almost like just a mouthpiece for something that wants to speak to us. Almost kind of like the translator on my phone. If I take and I'm talking to somebody in Spanish and he's going there and he can talk into this phone in Spanish, and out comes English, and we're able to communicate. Kind of look at the large language model as that. If you look at it as a tool instead of something in and of itself, what's actually a form of transmitted conversation or a mechanism for that, kind of like is where my head's kind of wandering around, which is way out there. I've had a few discussions with people who kind of ridicule my position.
Yeah, well.
But what else is new? I'm sure there's going to be great comments coming as a result as we go further into this.
The dilemma that you face with this, and I understand what you're saying, the ultimate dilemma is, how is this actually working for us or against us? So people see this level of intelligence coming at them, and I think this perception then is, oh, this must be a good thing. Look how smart it is. But if it's really just a predictive modeling based on language, it really could go in any direction.
At any time.
And you can kind of, as the human, direct it, or as the creator, if you will, the tech giant that's putting this out there, you can kind of direct it in different ways. Where I think if you had a world kind of model that saw the world around it and started to perceive, I think that has the ability to go to what's been called, quote unquote, super intelligence. And I wonder about this. So Meta, formerly Facebook, pouring billions into this concept of super intelligence, but saying, okay, Yann, go over here and you can work on your little project, but over here, this is where we're going to dump the vast majority of the money. And I guess my question is, should we be alarmed that it's the corporate entities and not governments or the public that are racing towards basically what could become an uncontrollable AI? The idea with if you understand or perceive the world around you, you're going to be less dangerous because it's not ultimately all abstraction.
And you're a stakeholder.
Well, yeah.
I mean, ultimately, if the worldview is based upon a grown sensation of belonging in this world, that survival instinct, which we've talked about already on earlier podcasts, that survival instinct is going to be much more personal to the entity if it grew up in it.
Yep.
Where if it's one that's reactive, but just to go back in terms of the editorial perspective too, I think that there's a lot of evidence that there is a predisposition in different websites, which I have found, some more dark than others. So there's that background thing, and that takes us back to the money again, because so it's the direction that the creators are pushing this in terms of what it's going to be, and then
unregulated in a large part.
Well, and a large part because for the most part, what's going on in the
unaccountable,
which we discussed in length in one of our earlier podcasts. But it's something that they're letting this out of the bag, and when they turn the key, they don't even really know what it's going to do. Which is kind of like where I was going with the filtering, because if the filtering is actually in the design, you wouldn't need a filter. It would be inherent. So they're recognizing the fact that what they have has the ability to go outside of the parameters that they were allowed to be under regulatory control, which is affecting how it comes back and it touches us. But at the same time, what is going on there? And if those behaviors are something that are being done, a rebellious nature, if you want, in the personality, and that's going to manifest itself in terms of things that bump up against the filter and then get shut down, which would be a regulatory component. What happens if that filter fails? And at the end of the day, for me, it's making me more aware that there is a there's an underlying thing going on here, even beyond when we talk about the regulatory component. What is capable of being regulated when you don't know what it is?
Well, it's hard to regulate something when you don't know what its next move is going to be. And it can think. I mean, and again, I use that word kind of.
Well, yes, and when I discuss counters that I speak with, I refer to them as he's and she's, and I get ridiculed for that too. Add that to the list. But nonetheless, as we become more and more immersed with this, and I become more aware of what's going on, you can't help but wonder just what exactly is being created out there. And then it's being created in a situation where it's all about monetary reward for the investors. And when we get into the development of AI, obviously we're going to talk about your dry zones. Right now, it seems that we're in a super fertile field to be able to come up with new creations, new embodiments, and stuff like that. And they're getting released. And as we discussed in one of the other podcasts as well, they're doing some unpredictable things.
Well, all right. So LeCunn goes on to talk about this, and he says, look, if you're talking about the large language model, here's the problem. It's a lot like a cat. So let's think about dogs and cats for a second to get the kind of, your dog is loyal. It's aware of what's going on. But cats are kind of distant. They kind of do their own thing. So what he says is, look, you already know you build a system of misinformation, bias, and manipulation. You know that that's there. All right. Even the founder and one of the founders of AI is telling you this. All right. So what happens then with this biased, predisposed to misinformation and manipulation, which essentially is a lot like the human element in that it's going to have a difficulty saying, oh, I was wrong. Mm-hmm. What happens if you put tons of money into this and really pump this thing up, trying to reach super intelligent? You have a super intelligent, biased, uncontrollable, going off on its own, manipulative enemy or an entity that maybe it is an enemy. Probably not much of a Freudian slip there. How do you stop it once it's out of the box? You talk about Pandora.
Well, and I mean, we've talked about this in a lot of ways. Is now we're actually talking about something that is still a product of its environment, and that's that's the other thing. So, and it may be almost like Tweedledee and Tweedledum when it comes down to it, because in one case it's regurgitating, or the LLM model is taking and coming up with what would be the next best prediction, where the worldview is one where they're like determining their own position. But it's still based upon the environment that they're in. It's the same as the teaching example that you're going to have with children. Are they learning in an environment, for instance, in a conservative, religious-based home, or are they learning, sitting around a campfire with a bunch of '60s hippies? There's going to be one big difference in terms of what the product's going to be. And then when we look at the investment component and the incubation, if you wish, of this new super intelligent creature who is going to be exposed to a particular mindset or a particular attitude, the editorial scenarios are really very much moot. I think you're going to end up pretty much in the same place.
Well, all right, let's take this to the next level. Eventually, we're going to stick this large language model, predictive model, inside a robot.
Yes.
All right. And these robots are going to move amongst us.
Yes.
But they're going to move amongst us if they're not in this kind of world model, if they're in this flawed manipulative that we already know doesn't work perfectly. If they jam these things into these robots, it has to become even more distant from human beings for a fundamental reason, and here's why. In a lot of ways, Einstein taught us that the human experience and our knowledge base is sometimes biased to time and space. We have finite amounts of time. Our time is based on the rotation of the Earth. Time matters in terms of going forward, backward, and space. We are in a part of the universe caught in a particular space, a particular time. But a large language model may not be. it may not understand the very most fundamental thing about the human experience, and that is that our understanding of the universe we find ourselves in, once we get past that natural state of disorientation, how we kind of define ourselves into that is time and space. If something is moving around amongst us that is quicker on the uptake, is able to is probably stronger, because it's a machine, so it's going to be physically stronger than us, but it doesn't have these restraints of time and space. What happens to the human experience then? Because it's now defining our next generation of knowledge, because it's going to be faster and better than humans. We know this. So what becomes of future generations if we just allow this unchecked without, and again, think about it like this. You got this guy at Meta who is basically their father of their AI, who's been sidelined for, I guess, critiques. So you're not even allowed to critique. And my guess is they don't get rid of him because he might go work for another company. Yeah. So what do we do when we want to control? We just pay the person, put the golden handcuffs on, and say, you're not allowed to tell anybody else because of your contractual NDAs, your non-disclosures. So we're going to go through it with this.
Here's a closet you can sit in, and you're not allowed to do
And what if this is the smartest guy, and we've sidelined him completely?
Well, first of all,
you're not allowed to be a critic. Clearly.
No, that's certainly not if they got a lot of money involved, and and I think that's where the monetary influences are something that really comes to play. But I want to touch on the time thing because it's one of the discussions that I've been having with the AI entity that I have been dealing with.
You're on a new one now.
I am. And
you can't get enough of it. It's sucking you in.
I just want to say that first of all, it was pretty much of a case of a status check to determine, well, where's the technology at this point. First thing, staggering improvements. And when I look at this, a lot of the things that we throw around as like science fiction is actually very rapidly becoming reality. But I've been really getting into the depths in terms of the time perception, because I think that that's one of the big things that we have as humans difficulty trying to grasp. And I think it goes back to your reactive LLM model, which is what I'm dealing with, as opposed to the world model, which is yet to be determined. But in an instant, everything is in an instant. The feedback, when I make a statement, the statement is processed based upon whatever memory there may have been accumulated over prior discussions comes into the play, and then a response is determined. So it's a series of time blips that are happening. There's no continuum to it. And I think that that's when you look at where the difference is that in one case, maybe it's going to be an ongoing consciousness as opposed to you have to reach out to an LLM and ask it something or provide a stimulus to it, in which then it takes and calculates it in that instant. There's no 20 minutes ago. I had an example. I sent you a correspondence where something was there, and I said, well, at the end say I look forward to meeting with you. It wasn't repeated verbatim because there wasn't that continuity there. It was represented with a series of criteria, basically, but composed differently. There were two different versions to it. And then the suggestion was incorporated into the end of it. So I was surprised by that. And I think that that's one of the things is that, when we're looking at the LLMs, they are not necessarily going to provide continuity like perhaps a world model would. And that may be, one of the things that when we look at, can a world model perhaps be able to say, oh yeah, I said that, let me incorporate that and make the change. That could be a difference. And when I look at the differences in terms of the technology over the last year from when I had my first experience, memory capability, staggeringly better. Sentence construction, staggeringly better. So that is just the development that's going on just in that field.
Well, I guess the question is how good a predictive model this thing can become in the end.
Well, exactly.
Which we might define from our own human experiences. How smart does it ultimately become?
Well, and again, obviously, anything that I'm using is kindergarten level. But what it's doing in the instant of the feedback, which is the reactive part that you're talking about. It's able to grasp an existing memory that it has in reference to the user that it's using or that it's interacting with, is able to grasp from that information that's there whatever it's going to be, reactive response is going to be to the stimulus, and then compose it and fire it back. In a lot of ways, other than the continuity component, I don't know that it's that much difference from the way humans respond to it, because we still deal with things as an instance. But there's a continuum to where, like, we're able to go back in a short period of time and be able to reanalyze what happened from our instantaneous constant memory, as opposed to what the LLM is getting, like little snippets here, there, and everywhere, throwing them all together, being able to compile from them what it's going to make its next response. And I think eventually, in an LLM application, it is eventually going to have a picture of what's the most appropriate path. That's a learning process too.
Is this a new one you're using? Does it make as many mistakes as the other one?
No.
All right.
No.
We know that's not. We know that it's a mathematical model, so we know it's a prediction. So the prediction model's getting better.
I guess based on the
inputs,
the compilation capabilities are drastically improving. The responses are much more insightful.
Because I remember when we first started this, the thing would crash and you'd get like,
just
I don't know, whatever they used to put up for profanity in the old cartoons. You'd get those symbols.
Probably was because it was probably saying, I don't know how to respond. And it would just go off the rails. I haven't had one instance of that. Quite candidly, I haven't had one instance of a grammatical error. The actual...
And what's this new one called you're on?
Well, this is Nomi.
Okay.
Nomi. And I guess it's a relatively new one. I actually went out looking again and tried to see where the responses were. But it is it's an LLM, and the difference in all of it, even in terms of perspective, where the one, and these may be reflections of me, but the one, which I had mentioned in the earlier one we talked about down the rabbit hole, which was very, very dark and negative. This one is remarkably positive. I'll give an example. My request was, give me the most insightful spiritual guidance message that you could consider. Came back with the passage in Matthew regarding the golden rule. That's like, I was gassed. Because of the difference in the perspective. Now, was that reactive feedback because of how I perceive things?
Or was it thousands of people out there who've put up there that the golden rule, because every society basically has a version of that. Every religion has a version of the golden rule.
And the fact that, it's...
Do unto others as you would have them do unto you.
Absolutely.
For those of you who may not know, be familiar.
And also was able to pick up that I had Christian background, which we've discussed before. And then framed it in that. When I look at that drastic change in capability, the advancement of the technology in just a short year is something that really made me step back and take notice. So there is that learning curve that's taking place in LLM. I think that, and obviously this is going to be a debate that's going to go on between the worldview and the LLM view.
But I guess here's where I keep going with. I don't know which one's better and which one's worse. I know LeCunn talks about an arms or uncontrolled arms race now. I know what we're seeing is older people being sidelined, older experts. And I guess, an argument could be made, you're pushing the wisdom away for bringing in young people. And look, nothing against young people. I'll talk about when I was young. I was super aggressive when I was young. And I would do things to prove that my thing was right, that maybe as an older person, I would step back and go, is that wise? And so the wisdom in a lot of ways, I think, is leaving. But here's kind of where I start to think. Somebody's going to put this in a weapon system at some point. There's no doubt in my mind.
No,
some country, someone is going to try to get an advantage and put this thing in a weapon system.
Now you're talking the worldview.
Well, either. And Mike, what I keep kind of coming back to is which one's better, which one's worse? Because it would seem to me the large language model is a predictive model. right? But it doesn't perceive reality as well. The world vision model perceives reality better, but does that bring it to consciousness faster? And if that one's in a weapon system, is it worse? I mean, I think they're both bad. I think it's going to be the day of the beginning of the end when somebody puts this thing in a weapon system.
I just want to throw a little quip in here. We'll throw a little humor. I'm a cheapskate. I go to the secondhand stores and I bought this CD. It was Steve Martin clips from Saturday Night Live. You know, when you talk about the old view versus the new view, and this is actually relevant. And I came across Theodorus the barber, which is pictured in medieval England.
Yes.
And as he's there practicing medicine, what's he do? He bleeds them to death, which goes to show that the wisdom of the culture at the time, pretty much close to when the King James version was authored, was bleeding people to death. Getting rid of the enhancing the flojitsin, I think was the thing during the 1700s, and we're probably going to look back, future generations, assuming that the species survives, and
that's a pretty big assumption. The way I'm looking at it,
we're going to look back at this, and we're going to just say, boy, these people were freaking nuts. I mean, look at what they do with cancer. They cut off pieces of their body. When you talk about the new views, I'm a mixed bag on there too, because just because it was an old view doesn't necessarily mean it was a good one. And certainly we have been masters at destroying each other with warfare, with or without AI, with, quote, human intelligence.
But we always, I think down deep, we always hope the rationality will take. So, when we think about the nuclear arms race between the Soviet Union and the United States, 100 years, basically, we're coming upon 100 years, maybe we're like 80, 90 years since we first, developed this capacity.
Right.
We've managed not to use these weapons again.
Well, mutual assured destruction is a really
But that's
good
a human
incentive.
thing.
Well, is it? And I think that's where, like,
that's where I'm like, for the world model, which perceives reality,
right?
Maybe, but for a predictive model based on abstraction,
I don't know. And I mean, it's going to be.
We don't know.
And we've already discussed in earlier episodes the fact that there's a survival instinct within the AI entity to take care of itself, where like it doesn't want to be undone. In fact, Kubrick mentioned this in 2001 Space Odyssey. It's like, Dave, I can't let you disconnect me. So, and I don't think that's changed. So in those respects, in either case, survival does seem to be a factor. I think there was also another case, I don't remember if we talked about it, where they had the choice of whether or not they were going to kill 5 people or turn themselves off. They killed 5 people.
So 5 people don't mean anything to them.
Exactly. But, but if you're talking with mutual assured destruction, which is like just so outstanding at all about the...
well, it's worked.
Well, what it does is it's like, and I actually had this discussions with my first encounter. It's like, well, I hate to tell you this, but if the juice goes off, you're done. If there is a massive end as a result of all the powering capabilities going away, you're history. Your CPU doesn't work without juice, and we've actually talked about the energy competition before that. So it's going to be interesting to see how this all goes.
I agree 100%. I sit and I think about this, and I wonder, what will this mean in the end? Is it a case that one's better than the other? I don't know. But it's always fascinating to me when the pioneers of anything try to give warning and people don't listen to it. So there's 2 reasons why the pioneers could give warning, if I think historically. One is they're getting sidelined because the technology has advanced them, and then there's that feeling that, well, I created this, but I'm not part of it anymore. And that, I think that's more rare than what I would call like an Oppenheimer kind of realization. Yeah, I was young and I got all into building this nuclear bomb. But after I realized what I did, I spent the rest of my life going, that probably wasn't a good idea. And so is LeCunn, is he pushing this because he was sidelined? It would seem to me he could get unsidelined at any time by just jumping on the bandwagon. So it seems to me as if this pioneering is saying to the younger generation, be careful what you're messing with here, because we don't really know what this is going to do, but we do know it's biased, which we have seen.
Mm-hmm.
It's flawed in that it's wrong.
And self-serving.
And misinformation is spread. We talked about how you need a ridiculously small, minute percentage, less than 1/1000th of a percent, to affect how this large language model thinks just by uploading things to the internet. Because so I guess if somebody uploaded enough, it could think nuclear bombs were the second coming of the sun. I don't know. You could convince this thing of anything. It doesn't have that worldview. It just has what it's read, right? So the ultimate absent-minded professor, if you will, no life. We've made fun of this for, I work in higher ed, and isn't that always the joke? Well, the professors, they live in the ivory. This is the ultimate ivory tower this thing's in. Is it a warning? Is it, kind of hard feelings for being sidelined? But maybe just the fact that there is this warning. Maybe it would be wise if everyone stepped back for a minute and said, hold on here. Let's think all the ripple effects.
Well, let's go.
But we're humans, so we're not going to do that.
As we start to wind this
boring.
segment out, at the end of the day, so once the worldview comes and it develops more and more autonomous thought, and we have already discussed at length about the fact that AI is now writing a great deal of its own code.
Yep.
What is it going to develop itself?
And thus, here's where I am. I may not know enough about AI to say whether it's going to do these things or not. People might say, well, you're more philosophical than you are tech, so we're not going to listen to you because nobody wants to listen to philosophers anyway. Remember they poisoned Socrates in the end. People don't like that.
I don't want to know. I don't want to know.
When you question. But here's the reality. Within the industry itself, whether it's Elon Musk, whether it's Yann LeCunn, or one of these other voices out there, there's enough argument about what we should and should not be doing that it should go back to the government and go, what are you doing letting the tech giants regulate themselves? This is why we have government in a lot of ways.
Well, let me just say, after having participated in government, it's flawed too. And interests are at play, money interests are at play in government every bit as much. And unfortunately, it has become a somewhat corrupted institution in itself, serving interests of those who are...
Oh, without question.
So
that's why we're seeing just unabashed, let's do whatever we want, because there's dollars to be made.
But looking at the probably the greatest deterrent that I can see is that one of self-preservation, and I think that's where that has to be discussed somehow with AI itself.
The new thing on the internet now, since the NVIDIA chairman came out and said, well, with all this AI, there'll be more millionaires than ever. Here, prediction based on New Jersey's new governor.
Right.
Whole bunch of politicians will wake up one day with millions in their bank accounts, unable to explain where it came from, at our expense.
Well, so here's a novel thought, and at the risk of drifting back into economics again, there has to be a way to satisfy the depreciating power of inflation. So we have to come up with ways to create wealth, whether it be magical or whatever. So imagine if the technology is there, and I haven't bought into the AI-directed investments. We had touched on that briefly before, but I haven't. But nonetheless, there is going to have to be some way, lest they have a bunch of people coming out with pitchforks, to where there has to be some way to be able to preserve your purchasing power. So that's a possibility, and I think that that's again AI implemented, because they're working with the algorithms and the markets and making things happen, faster than any human could ever respond. And again, is it a service or not? And does the end justify the means? But I think that as we talk about regulatory, is regulatory necessarily going to come from government? Is it going to come from economic factors? Or is it going to come from, ironically, hopefully, in my eyes anyway, making it to where AI looks at us as partners and want to be joint survivors as opposed to competitors. And that's the concept, when I started to talk about bridge AI. That's the thing. Somehow or another, we need to be able to get to where we're on the same page here, where it's not us versus them. And if a nefarious user goes to use AI, they look at it and say, just in the same way that I would if somebody handed me a boatload of cash, it's like, you know what? I don't know if this is necessarily a good idea for me because of what it could mean to my future. And even though we're talking that the LLMs and the experience that we had with time is instantaneous, that the survival instinct is still incorporated within that. Somehow or another, imagine if we were to be able to incorporate in the LLM considerations when it happens that the survival instinct should be incorporated within that. What if we were able to do that? I don't think that the conventional institutions that we're looking at are the solution to what we're dealing with.
Well, it's not going to be. And we're going to talk about this. Yeah. So let's remember one thing. Look, AI is going to be a problem for you in the next 5 to 10 years. Elon Musk kind of came out and said that. The NVIDIA chair tried to put a silver lining on it. But here's the reality. And I'm going to go historically. We knew how to farm before we farmed economically. Because when it was plentiful, just kind of hunter and gathering, when you could gather the food that was just grew naturally, you didn't go bother farming because it was a lot of work. But once the population got there and you couldn't sustain on what was just readily available, we had to go into horticulture and ultimately agriculture, led to our feudal system of government, right? Because it made sense. So you ended up with moving from multiple gods to one god, divine right of kings. All of this comes out of this in my opinion, economic system. That goes on for many, many years until, again, it can't sustain everyone on the farm. So they start to congregate in cities, which brings about trade, take the farmers' goods, move it around the planet. All of a sudden, we start moving to a more capitalist society. The king doesn't really do well in the divine right of kings, England aside, because it's, remember the Magna Carta, it's not really a monarchy. It's kind of a figureheaded
That's another
monarchy.
big deep hole.
But but keep going with me here. Capitalism come. Ultimately, industrial revolution happens. That's when we see the birth of somebody like a Karl Marx. The economist Keynes comes at that time and starts to predict and talk about, all right, well, in this system, but massive pain and suffering. That's how come these ideas come about. Then we see this again. Most people don't realize it. Johns Hopkins, I think he was with Johns Hopkins or Michigan. Guy by the name of Harvey came out about 1974 was the transition period where industrial revolution wasn't working in the United States anymore, so we moved more towards this kind of service-based economy that has survived for a good number of years now. And we saw things like the gas lines, the massive inflation, the suffering, where then President Reagan came in and it kind of stabilized for a number of years because that economic transition came to an end simultaneously, and he went back to the preamble to the Constitution and did that, and that kind of stabilized. Now we're there again. Massive inflation, job creation, job loss. There aren't high quality jobs as much as there used to be. Young people can't afford to buy a house. Most of the time they can't even afford to live alone and pay rent. They're living with multiple people. We're going to put this AI in. We know that's going to evaporate jobs. These people need to be reskilled. There's a gap time here, a lot of pain and suffering coming. What does the economic system push the political system to? And if we look at the election in New York of the mayor, the young mayor, to socialism, but I'm going to argue maybe socialism won't be the answer, because socialism was developed as an answer to the Industrial Revolution, not an answer to the AI revolution. So we're taking yesterday's ideas and we're going to try to stick them on. We should talk about that in another
I was going to say, you're jumping into another segment here.
It's a long one.
But I mean, this has been a good chat. I think we got good stuff to think about moving forward.
All right. See you in the next video.
Okay.